For the Halloween spirit this year, I've decided to continue my series of reviews for the Resident Evil franchise. Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 made their mark in the survival horror genre, while 4 ramped up the action but still kept the classic Resident Evil atmosphere alive. Then came 5, which really switched gears into a full-on co-op action shooter. For Resident Evil 6, well, this one decided to take things even further, trading subtle horror for the over-the-top set pieces and endless quick-time events. In doing so, Resident Evil 6 unfortunately became known as the black sheep of the series, the one that left a bad taste in the fans' mouths. Thankfully, Capcom would later then right the ship with Resident Evil 7. But this entry still carries that infamous reputation. Over time, Resident Evil 6 has actually seen a resurgence of praise from fans. When I scroll through YouTube these days, most of what I find are people talking about how much they loved this game, and maybe, just maybe, people overreacted back in 2012. I genuinely love seeing that. It's wild how much perspective can change just with time. Not every game gets that kind of second chance, but when it does, it's always nice to see communities come together and appreciate it for what it is. Now here's the thing, this was actually my first time ever playing the game, and I went in with an open mind. So the question is, do I hate it, do I love it, or were gamers just too harsh on this one? Well, let's find out in my review of Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 6 was released on October 2nd, 2012 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It was then later ported to the PC in 2013, followed by a re-release in 2016 on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and finally the Nintendo Switch in 2019. In total, this entry went on to sell an impressive 9.7 million units across all versions. What you are seeing here is the footage from the PC version. Resident Evil 6 was originally scheduled to release on November 20th of 2012, but partway through development, Capcom decided to speed up production and push the release a full month earlier. At the time, this was Capcom's largest project ever, with a staggering team of over 600 people working to bring this game to life. That scale makes sense when you consider what they were attempting: 4 fully fledged campaigns, each with their own storylines, gameplay styles, and perspectives, and a total of 7 playable characters across the entire experience. It wasn't just a sequel, it was Capcom's attempt to turn Resident Evil into a cinematic epic, something that felt more like a blockbuster film than a traditional survival horror game. They actually responded to fan criticism of Resident Evil 4 and 5 for not having the classic zombies, so they decided to bring them back for RE6. I'll get into how I feel about the zombies and enemies later in the review, but it's always nice to see developers actually listening to the fan base, giving us what we want, not just what they think we want. Going into this game, it honestly felt like I was about to experience the Avengers version of Resident Evil, bringing together some of the franchise's biggest names like Leon Kennedy and Chris Redfield. With such a massive crossover storylines, I really wish Capcom had gone all out and included other fan favorites like Jill Valentine and Claire Redfield. Considering this game is built around co-op gameplay, having those two team up with Leon or Chris would have been an awesome treat for longtime fans. Now, considering I haven't played any of the spin-offs yet, there's probably a valid story-driven reason why Jill and Claire didn't return, so excuse my ignorance there if that is truly the case. I do plan on reviewing the spin-offs eventually, but I want to finish the mainline series first before diving into those, and also play the remake, so it'll be a while. The main antagonist of Resident Evil 6 is Derek C. Simmons, a high-ranking member of the US government and one of the key leaders of the family. Simmons is directly responsible for unleashing the C virus, which sets off the chain of global bioterror incidents seen across all 4 campaigns. His experiments and political power make him one of the most dangerous enemies in the series, and his actions serve as the central link tying Leon, Chris, Jake, and Ada's stories all together. Overall, I think the story for Resident Evil 6 is alright. It certainly has its moments. I really enjoyed Leon's campaign because for a little while, it actually felt like Resident Evil again. It's eerie, suspenseful, and it leans into that slow, creepy tension that the series was built on. But that doesn't last long. After a few minutes of solving some light puzzles and taking down a few zombies, you're suddenly thrown back into another action-packed cinematic roller coaster, explosions, gunfire, and all. I don't mind having a partner most of the time, and it can be fun to have a friend join in for the chaos, but for me, Ada's playthrough stood out the most. She's completely alone through most of her story, and the isolation brings back a real sense of suspense. Technically, you can play Ada's campaign in co-op, but your partner isn't a part of the actual story and disappears during cutscenes. Playing it solo makes it way more intense because, let's be honest, being alone in Resident Evil games is always a lot more nerve-wracking. Chris has always been one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise, but man, I just did not enjoy his campaign here. My biggest complaint isn't really about the story itself, it's primarily the gameplay. Most of the time, you're fighting off what I like to call zombies with guns, better known as the Javo, whatever. The Javo are mutated soldiers infected with the C virus, and they carry all kinds of weapons. You'll usually find them in large groups, and they can take an absurd amount of bullets before finally going down. Sometimes they'll even mutate mid-fight, transforming into these very grotesque insect-like creatures that make combat feel more chaotic than tense. At least with Resident Evil 4 and 5, even though you weren't technically fighting off zombies, the enemies still were zombie-like. But here, it honestly just feels like I'm fighting an entire organized militia, which, to be fair, is exactly what is happening here. And that's where it loses me. I just don't feel like I'm playing a Resident Evil game anymore. And honestly, that's both disappointing and really annoying. On the flip side, however, I actually really enjoyed Jake and Sherry's playthrough. I chose to play as Sherry here because she's another legacy character and I always like seeing her return. Her dynamic with Jake is great and a lot of their missions were genuinely fun. I also think their campaign had a stronger sense of tension than the others, mostly because they've got this nemesis-like monster relentlessly hunting them down for most of their story. It really gave their campaign this constant sense of danger and adrenaline that made it stand out in a good way. One minor issue I had though, even with Jake and Sherry's campaign, is how the game handles the overlapping storylines. Since all of the campaigns intertwine and you're basically playing through the same events from different perspectives, you eventually end up replaying the same missions more than once. And honestly, to me, that just feels lazy, like an easy way to pad out the game's total playtime. Now, I get why it happens, and I understand it's meant to reinforce how these stories connect, but I can't help feeling like there had to be some better way to do it. Something that keeps the crossover moments without forcing the player to repeat entire sections that they've already done. I will say, even though Resident Evil 6 completely turned away from its horror roots and went full action movie mode, I actually had a lot of fun with the melee combat. The melee system in this game is really fun, and when it clicks, it feels awesome. Landing a perfect dodge and counterattacking just to watch your character pull off a full-on brutal takedown. It really makes you feel like a total badass here. Another thing I really appreciated was how each campaign had its own heads-up display design. It's a small touch, but it makes each storyline feel distinct, like you're stepping into a different tone or play style with each new character. As for the weapons, you've got your usual arsenal: pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, pretty standard stuff. But I've got to say, when you get to Ada's campaign and you finally get your hands on the crossbow, it is very satisfying to use. Quiet, precise, and stylish. It fits her character perfectly. I'm definitely not a fan of the overuse of QuickTime events. Every once in a while, they're fine, but here they pop up way too often, usually during moments where characters should just be able to do it themselves. At least this time around, they're not shoved into cutscenes like they were in Resident Evil 4, where they would catch you completely off guard in the middle of a cinematic moment. For a game that came out in 2012 though, Resident Evil 6 still looks beautiful in a lot of places. Sure, it's showing its age now, especially when you compare it to the likes of Resident Evil 7 and Village, but the visuals, lighting, and set pieces still hold up surprisingly well. The voice acting is another major highlight. Everyone delivers a solid performance, and I really enjoyed some of the newcomers, especially Helena. She was a great addition to the series and her performance fit perfectly within the Resident Evil tone. I just wish Capcom hadn't leaned so hard into the action movie side of things. Hopefully Resident Evil 6 served as a hard-learned lesson about how far you can drift from what this franchise is supposed to be. Resident Evil 4 struck a perfect balance between action and horror. RE5 pushed that balance a little further towards action, but it still worked. RE6, it went completely off the rails. Still, I love this series enough that I could easily see myself coming back to replay this one, especially with New Game Plus, which adds a lot of replayability. Throughout your playthroughs, you'll find items that will earn you skill points. After finishing a chapter, you spend these points to upgrade things like weapon damage, melee strength, reload speed, ammo drop rate, or even your resistance to enemy attacks. Those upgrades carry over between campaigns as well, which makes it worth coming back for more. So yeah, Resident Evil 6 might not be the masterpiece Capcom hoped for, there's still fun to be had here. It's messy, chaotic fun, but it's still Resident Evil at heart. Going into this game, I honestly expected a complete dumpster fire, especially with how much hate I always heard surrounding this title. But after finally playing through it myself, I can say this: Resident Evil 6 isn't the best in the series, and I totally understand why some fans do not like it. But I also don't think it deserves to be completely written off. It's flawed, it's over the top, and it definitely strays from what Resident Evil is supposed to be, but there's still fun to be had here. So if you're a big fan of the franchise and you've never given this one a real chance, I'd say at least try it out for yourself. You might be surprised by how much you might end up actually enjoying some parts of it. At the end of the day, every Resident Evil game brings something different to the table, and whether if it's good or bad, it's always interesting to look back and see how far the series has come. But with that said, I cannot wait to talk about Resident Evil 7. Guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Pedro Ordonez, also known as GameLight7. Please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up. Do whatever you guys can to support this channel. Let me know what you thought of Resident Evil 6 in the comment section down below. Also, let me know what you think I should talk about in a future video, and I will see you guys next time in my next video. Peace out.